Welcome to the Canadian Beef Cattle Podcast, presented by the Beef Cattle Research Council. The most popular content from beefresearch.ca, available on the go. Before we get into this week's episode, a quick message from the BCRC.
Forage management is an important part of beef farming and ranching. Forage U-Pick is an interactive initiative aimed at providing farmers and ranchers with resources and tools to make informed decisions about forage management. It offers online learning modules and resources on various aspects of forage management, including selecting the right forage species, calculating your seeding rates, and forage weed management. Explore the Forage U-Pick resources and how it can work from your operations by clicking the link in the show notes. This episode is titled, It's Looking Like a Long Cold Winter, and features the BCRC's Science Director, Dr. Reynold Bergen.
Hi there, I'm Reynold. This Research on the Record article originally appeared in the June 2026 issue of Canadian Cattleman magazine, and it's been reposted on the beefresearch.ca site with the publisher's permission. Today we're talking about how it's looking like a long cold winter. Back in August 22, there was a research column about breeding alfalfa for Canada's climate, and this is an update on that project. Now, legumes are the most economical way that grazers can increase pasture and cattle productivity. Of course, that's provided bloat risk gets managed by using low bloat species or varieties or anti-bloat agents, or adjusting grazing timing, or using mixed legume grass stands. But of all the legumes, alfalfa has received the most breeding focus, and it's the most common and productive legume available. In Canada, alfalfa developed for grazing needs to be winter hardy, it needs to yield well, and it needs to withstand grazing pressure. And it's really difficult to put those three traits together in the same variety. Now, winter just ended, but there's another one coming, so we may as well wrap our heads around that. Now, every living thing starts to get ready for winter as fall approaches and as the days get shorter. Squirrels start caching nuts, and the bears start to gorge on berries, and calves get weaned, and feed supplies and quality get evaluated. Pregnant cows and heifers get sorted to get fed in winter feeding groups based on age and body condition score and whatnot. My father-in-law recruits my family to help split and haul firewood up to his woodshed. And these activities are all about making sure that there's enough energy to get through the winter and early spring. Alfalfa does this too. Alfalfa begins to go dormant as fall approaches. And when that happens, what it does is it switches from using photosynthesis to convert sunlight into above ground forage growth. So it switches to using sunlight to produce and store sugar in the roots. And that makes sure that there's enough energy in the plant to survive the winter and power spring growth in spring. So they get dormancy ratings, and those range from 1 to 11, and they refer to how much fall growth can be expected. And varieties with a lower fall dormancy number are more dormant, so they regrow less than varieties with a high rating. And fall dormancy supports winter survival, but it reduces forage yield because those plants go dormant sooner. Then there's winter survival. And ratings for that range from 1, which is extremely winter hardy, to 6, which is non-winter hardy. And grazing tolerance sort of plays into that as well, because if you graze alfalfa during that critical fall adaptation period when it's going dormant, that removes the leaves that drive the photosynthesis. So that means the alfalfa can't store as much energy in the roots for next spring. Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada has been breeding alfalfa for improved winter survival for over 30 years. A team led by Vern Barron at Legumes and Annie Claussens in Quebec City summarized their recent progress at a scientific conference last year. And the online version of this article links to the poster that they presented if you want to read that for yourself. So what did they do? Well, they looked at 25 different yellow and purple flowered Canadian alfalfas with fall dormancy ratings below 3, so quite dormant. Some of those 25 alfalfas were established varieties that are available on the market. Some were cultivars that are currently being bred, and some were specific strains that have been collected from pastures that have been seeded decades ago. So these are varieties that had survived for a long time, so they're clearly winter hardy and grazing tolerant. So they did DNA testing to evaluate the genetic relationships among those alfalfas, and they established plots in Normandin, Quebec, and in Legumes, Alberta in 2016, and then they evaluated fall dormancy and winter survival in 2017 through 2019. Then they took 18 of those alfalfas, they seeded them in 2019 and 2020, and used them in grazing trials at Legumes. And they grazed them in 2021 through 2023, and then evaluated forage yield and survival in 2024. So what did they learn? Well, in terms of genetic relationships, they found that the yellow-flowered, creeping-rooted alfalfa varieties and the purple-flowered, tap-rooted varieties fell into two genetically distinct clusters. That's not real surprising. The yellow-flowered varieties are often called Siberian alfalfa, and they're more common in Northern Europe. Those are the ones that are sometimes called falcata alfalfa. And the purple-flowered varieties are thought to have originated in the Mediterranean. So between the geographic distance between them and long time periods leads to genetic separation between the populations. Then, within that, the yellow alfalfas fell into two genetic clusters based on whether they were diploid, which means they have two sets of chromosomes, or whether they were tetraploid, which means they have four sets of chromosomes. The purple varieties were all tetraploid, so they all had four sets of chromosomes, but they fell into three genetic clusters that actually corresponded to slight differences in their fall dormancy or regrowth ratings. They looked at winter survival, and across all genetic types, winter survival was higher in Legumes than in Normandin. Survival was ranged from 75 to 95% in Legumes and 66 to 81% in Normandin. So different environmental demands in different places. That's why we need breeding programs in different places, or at least evaluation in different places, to make sure that we can line up what variety recommendations fit for different growing environments. In Legumes, survival tended to be lowest for the most dormant group, so 75% survival after 3 years, compared to the most dormant purple alfalfas, which survived over 90% after 3 years. The diploid yellow alfalfas tended to have higher survival than the tetraploid yellow alfalfas in Legumes. And then in Normandin, the least dormant purple alfalfas also tended to have lower survival after the 3 years, so 66% survival. About a third of them died out in the first 3 years in Normandin. Again, at least when this project was done, pretty challenging conditions there. And the diploid and triploid yellow alfalfa had identical survival rates in Normandin. In terms of fall dormancy, even though all 25 alfalfas were rated as very dormant, the different genetic groups still tended to differ in their fall regrowth. And that was related partly to winter survival, because yields obviously go down when fewer plants survive. And among the purple alfalfas, regrowth yield tended to be lower among the groups with fall dormancy, as we would expect. Among the yellow-flowered alfalfas, the diploid group were more dormant, so they had less regrowth than the tetraploid group. Trends were similar between Normandin and Legumes, and overall the range in fall dormancies overlapped between the purple and yellow alfalfas. That's kind of an important point, and we'll get back to that in a few minutes. They looked at or reported yield and grazing tolerance for 11 of those cultivars or populations. And this is where things really get interesting. The two alfalfas that were both the most high yielding were also the most grazing tolerant. But those two alfalfas were very different plants. So one of them was yellowhead, and that's a creeping rooted tetraploid yellow flowered alfalfa. But the other variety that was just as high yielding and just as grazing tolerant was one of the tap-rooted purple flowered strains, and it was one that came out of a field in northwest Alberta. Now, these yellow flowered, the Siberian alfalfas, are often thought to be better suited for northern climates, but this research suggests that's not always the case. Purple flowered varieties can do just as well if it's the right variety. So more research is needed to continue to test the up and coming varieties for fall dormancy, grazing tolerance, and winter survival. More research is needed to compare these alfalfas to commercially available varieties. More research is needed to assess whether they can compete in mixed stands with grass. More research is needed to evaluate how they perform in different regions and so on. So what does this mean to you? The punchline here is that this project isn't completed, but it is finished. Ag Canada eliminated the Quebec City and Lacombe research stations that were doing this work. They eliminated their forage programs, and they eliminated these research teams in January. Bottom line is that the CFIA has registered 31 new alfalfa varieties in Canada since 2022, so we're not short of new varieties. But all of those new varieties were developed in the US. And not only that, but they were developed at locations that were 300 to 1,200 kilometers south of Normandin and 700 to 1,600 kilometers south of Lacombe. Those varieties weren't tested in this study, but I suspect those southern varieties may not have performed too well this far north. But we won't know. Large multinational breeding companies focus their efforts on the largest markets. They don't focus on developing high-yielding, winter-hardy varieties for small regional markets like Canada. If these Ag Canada researchers are not relocated, the University of Saskatchewan will be Canada's only perennial forage variety development program left standing. It's beginning to look like Canada's cattle and forage producers are going to be in for some long, cold winters. Thanks for listening. I'll talk to you again next time.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode. You can find all relevant links and information at beefresearch.ca or in the show notes. The Beef Cattle Research Council is funded by the Canadian Beef Cattle Checkoff and strives for excellence in the production of Canadian beef, cattle, and forage through research, innovation, and extension. Tune in every Tuesday as the Canadian Beef Cattle Podcast delivers straightforward insights, expert information, and a wealth of practical knowledge for Canadian beef producers. Subscribe now.